The term favorite video game is tough to talk about because as a kid, whenever I would hear that phrase, whenever I would hear someone ask me, what's your favorite video game? I never wanted to answer it. I never wanted to answer it because I always thought that it's such a loaded, trivial question. Like, how do you have one favorite? But when you find that one game that changes your life, you know, that game that changed your scope as a gamer and changed what you liked about video games and changed what you compare everything to. When you can go back to that game again and again and again, when it becomes a part of your life, that's when it's a favorite. It's not that the game is necessarily great. It's not that the game is necessarily well designed. It's not necessarily that the game is revolutionary. It's the fact that that game was part of your upbringing. And it's the fact that that game is something that makes you who you are as a gamer. My name's Kevin Johnston. I'm the creator and operator of BeyondPolygons, and my favorite video game is Skies of Arcadia for the Dreamcast and Nintendo GameCube. I first came in contact with Skies of Arcadia probably close to when it came out, at least the GameCube version. The GameCube version came out in 2003. And you know, it wasn't like it was a game that I necessarily had wanted to play. I was the type of kid who every week I would drag my dad out to the local Blockbuster. It was weird. It wasn't even like the local Blockbuster. There was two in my hometown, and the Blockbuster that was farther away had like a bigger game section. They had bought the unit next to where they were, and in that unit it was only games. They even had like TV set up where you could play them and stuff. I always liked going to that one because that one had a way bigger selection. I remember one day I went to that store. I wanted to rent some game. I don't remember what it was. I don't know if there was a new Pokemon game out or what, but I remember I was going looking for something, a new release. There was a new game that I wanted to play. And as to be expected, on the day of release, there's generally not many rental copies or sometimes no rental copies, at least at first. The game wasn't in. I was upset, but you've already made this whole trip out there. You grab something, right? You grab a game to at least play until you can come back and try again, right? So I started looking around, started looking at other games that they had on the shelf. All you can really do is look at the box art to find the right game, right? And you can look at the front, and you can look at like the cool art on the front, you can look at the back, you can look at all the pictures on it, you can read little synopsis and stuff. Because we didn't have phones back then. We couldn't look up what the game was about. We couldn't look up reviews. And I saw this game, Skies of Arcadia. You had this cool looking dude on the cover with a sword and an eye patch, and there was like ships in the background. There's like this big green moon. It's pretty generic actually, like now that I'm looking at it, but I guess as a kid, whenever I saw something that looked kind of anime, well, how old would I have been? I was probably 11 at the time, right? When this game came out, at that time, when I see anime, the guy's got a little scar, he's got those angry eyes, very anime looking, man, I just wanted that game. And I'm sure there was other ones on the shelves, and I've done this before. There's other games that I grabbed that were anime, but I don't know why. It's like this game, I just want it now. I just always want to have it. I always want to own it. I'm so happy that I have it, and whenever I think of an RPG, this is the game that I play. So when I put the game in my GameCube for the first time, I started playing it. It handled the opening bits the right way for an adolescent to understand. It threw you right into the adventure. It started out with a cutscene showing this girl who was being chased by the Armada, or who was being chased by this metal airship looking thing. And we're already cool because like we got airships, like we got some steampunk stuff going on, so it's already looking cool. The pirates show up, and then you see the character that you play as, Vice. It makes him look really cool because he's just showing up in the dark of night, jumping down, landing on the ship. He just seems so cool. And then you're right into the game. You're into your first battle, and it's just basic. Like, the battling system in that game is just like Final Fantasy. Your character attacks, you get attacked back. It's all simple, it's all turn-based, it's all simplistic. But because of the character, you're being thrown right into it. I was instantly hooked, right? Like, I'm playing this, I enjoy this. And you're already in sort of the first dungeon. It's kind of the tutorial dungeon. You're going around, you're getting into random encounters with other guards on the boat. And then you keep heading through, and then you see this effeminate guy who's got the girl, and you don't know who he is, but he keeps talking about this country called Valua. Or I used to call it Valua as a kid, but I don't know how it's supposed to pronounce. Valua sounds a lot nicer for the name of a country. But anyway. And then you're running through it, and you get there, and then the boss shows up. And I remember, this was the first time I really remember feeling a cutscene, and like I wasn't prepared for it, you know? The camera sat there, and the camera zoomed in on this door as you hear the footsteps coming towards it, and the door just suddenly cracks a little bit, and Antonio, this bull-looking thing with gigantic horns and like these little bits of steampunk stuck to him because he's got like the metal armor and whatever, breaks through the door, and you're like, oh my god, what is that? It's a super easy boss. It's the first boss of the game, but his whole introduction and watching this whole thing with how Alfonso turns on his guard and throws him off and says, oh, I don't want the queen to get mad at me, I'm gonna say that my captain turned on me or something. And it was so easy to understand as a kid, and I was very like drawn in with the story, because although there was a lot of text, there's very little voice acting in the game. I felt so ingrained in the story. I was reading it, I was understanding it, it used a simple language that I understood. It wasn't throwing too many crazy big words at me. So I really liked it. And I really liked it. I was enjoying that. I was enjoying that the game did that. So then you get back to the base, and that's when your traditional early RPG stuff where you're kind of getting acquainted with the characters' regular lives. And I think what I started to really like about the game, what I really started to enjoy, was the fact that Vice, the character, the main character that you control, he would be the Cloud of the game, or the Zidane, or whatever the main character would be in a Final Fantasy game, the Titus, whatever, he's the main character. He felt so cool, you know? And when you're 11 or 12 years old, that's all you want. You want your hero to be cool, right? And I grew up with Sonic the Hedgehog, and this game is a Sega game, so I grew up with Sonic the Hedgehog. So the idea of the character not really being flawed and just being this, I'm gonna show the world that I mean business, and I'm gonna be the greatest pirate that ever lived. It was very fun to control him, because although I clearly don't empathize with that, I don't feel like I want to be the greatest pirate that ever lived. It feels empowering to be in control of a guy who isn't afraid of anything, who isn't afraid of any beast that's put in front of him. So through the early points of the game, when you head off to the first actual dungeon and you face that sentinel, and it's like this big robot that's like punching you and looks cool, you feel like the character just, Vice gets into his battle stance and he's just ready to take him on, and you're just so ready to play as him and beat this guy up, because Vice hypes you up because he's that kind of character. And then when you return to the home base and you see that Valua has shown up and destroyed your hometown, or where you grew up, they destroyed your home, Vice immediately gets angry and he's ready to fight back in an instant. And it not only makes you feel great to control a character like Vice, but it really hypes you up and pushes the story very quickly. If you had a character who was lost and sat there and whined and moped about the fact that his home was destroyed, which can be done well in other games, it feels like it really makes the game drag on. It makes your character feel like he needs to grow and so he needs to understand that he needs to fight for himself and whatever. But in this case, he's all ready to take on the world. He didn't even stutter. He was like, we're going to Valua and we're going to stop them. And I thought, I like this character. He's really cool. He's really entertaining. And he's ready to take on whatever stands in his way. I think that's really cool. Oh boy, there's a lot of moments in this game that I really enjoy that I can remember off the top of my head, but where do I start? Okay. In order of how they happen, when you first leave the island and you feel like the game is starting to move progressively and the game's starting to go, you immediately get attacked by that giant purple whale and you're like, oh my god, what is happening? And you're already shipwrecked. It was like, man, we just left and this is already happening. I know it seems like the story's a little sporadic, but I always remember that because it's just like, right as you thought the adventure was about to get started, you're already sidelined by something else. And I thought, like, that really blew me away. And then you meet Drachma and you're starting to already get the RPG tropes of meeting other characters along the way and growing and meeting all these new characters and figuring out how you're going to save the world. And at the beginning, you're just trying to save your family that's been imprisoned by the Valuan army. I'll always remember getting there. I remember when you land in Valua for the first time. When you get to Valua and you land in Valua is one of those polarized cities. There's the lower city and the upper city, and the lower city is poor. And I'll always remember walking around that town. And as I got older, I started talking to NPCs to start learning more about what's going on. And dear God, it was just so depressing. It was just so depressing to see the sadness and the depression in these characters. People just being like, man, I wish I had light. Man, I wish we had electricity. I wish we could afford everything that upper city had. And it does an amazing job of describing how Valua is evil, right? It's like they can just be evil and say they're going to take over the world, but to see their country and to see their civilians and to see how they react and to see how horrible their living conditions are. Because when you end up going to Upper City, which you don't spend a lot of time there, if you talk to any of the NPCs there, they're all just super snotty and full of themselves, and you're just like, these guys are horrible. Like, why would I ever want to help these people, right? But it makes you hate the government because the government, which is ultimately who you're fighting, right? It's the government and the military of that country. That's really just makes you like, you let this happen. Like, you don't take care of your poor and you let the rich people just be snotty and full of themselves. And it makes them really good antagonists just based off things like that. And it doesn't, like, obviously it helps that all the bosses that they send are like really cool and they got big swords and they're tough and they got these badass moves. But when you see their civilians and you see their way of life, oh man, you just don't want them to be a country anymore. You want to fight back. The first time you make it back from Valua and you've saved your homeland and Fina decides she can trust you and she joins your army, I remember her telling you the origin story and sets up the pacing of the game and everything that's going to happen. And she talks about where she's from and why she was sent here to collect the moon crystals and what the moon crystals are actually capable of. And she starts talking about these giant creatures and everything, and it's just full of exposition. And I know exposition is common in RPGs. They're just trying to set up the story. They're trying to tell you all the stuff that you're going to face along the way, essentially. But it was the first time I ever really felt that. And you had that really like sort of ominous, sad music sort of thing. But it felt really interesting. You know, it felt really interesting to me to be involved in the story and hearing all this from Fina. And like, now that she finally trusts you, like, she explains to you how big the story is really going to be. Because at first you think it's just cool, pirates and swords and cannons and whatever. But now it's, oh no, we're taking on these huge creatures and we're going to lead up to that. And throughout the entire game, you're going through all these big prolific sort of sagas. And as you go for the red moon crystal, you're in a desert and you're meeting all these characters in the desert. And then you go to the green moon crystal and you're meeting all these island dwellers who live in a forest, and they have fantastic music in that part of the game, by the way. And as you're going through it and you're learning more about all these different civilizations, it really connects you with the story, and I really like that. Another thing I liked is when you started doing the air battles, when you started flying around the ship. That was the game's chief selling point, was although the RPG combat was generally very generic, there was some mix-ups because like the characters would move around. It wasn't just like you're standing on opposite sides. And because of that, there was some like positional based attacks that could happen, but it seemed kind of all randomized anyway. But the air combat was so different. It was so focused on, it was just turn-based, you set your turns, they did their turns, but you would plan 4 attacks in advance. And because of that, it felt really strategic. Like you were planning your spirit usage because everything you used involved using spirit. And like you had to balance your resources for every attack and then prepare for maybe this turn I won't do as much damage because you would see what would be ahead in the next turn. So whatever happens next turn, maybe I just build up a lot of resources this turn and then hit them hard next turn rather than attacking it. It felt like the strategy was there while not being too convoluted or crazy. Like that's when the battle started to feel like this isn't just an RPG. You are fighting in these airships and you're doing like these dogfights. And even though it's turn-based, it was really cool to be strategic about it. Because then later, when you start taking on the giant monsters known as the Gigas, that's when you feel like you're taking on these like, you're taking on Godzilla in a little dinky wooden airship, right? Later you get a better ship that can like destroy these creatures, but when you're fighting them and you realize you can't do any damage to them, it builds into the narrative because now you're trying to figure out what to do every turn, not just to win, but to survive, right? You learn that if you hit them really hard on the turn that they're charging up their attack, if you plan it ahead, you can knock them off balance and then they don't hit you with the laser. So now you can survive for a few more turns. And I just thought that was so interesting how the combat, it wasn't like a generic story-based battle, you're supposed to lose this or you're supposed to survive for this many turns sort of thing. It was the fact that you need to do things the right way to continue the battle, to get to that point where you can progress the story. Because even though you don't take them out, you still have to figure out how to survive that long. And you need to, they often offered you certain points throughout a battle, being like, do you want to fly ahead or do you want to back off for a little bit? If you back off for a little bit, you can't hit them, but you also take less damage. So you had to start balancing these things and you had to start thinking out all your turns in advance. It felt really fun to be taking on these giant creatures and figuring out how to beat them, especially early on where you couldn't actually just take them out. Later you start being strong enough to take them out, and it feels really cool when you can take them out later because at first you couldn't. You could never take them out. Now that you have this firepower to take them out, it feels huge that you can actually take on these giant creatures that initially you didn't even stand a chance against. So it builds this really cool narrative and it feels like your characters grow, and it felt great. Another big point in the game is when I got to the Land of Ice. The whole story of the game was about collecting these moon crystals, and you have to go to all the different civilizations around the world and you have to go find their crystal. And when you're finding all the crystals, generally it's like a whole saga of stuff happens, just how you get there, just all the stuff that happens along the way, everything that happens within the country. There's like a whole story and there's a whole bunch of new characters you meet because you can also unlock new crew members. So you're picking up this crew from all these different civilizations and your team is starting to come together with like this amalgamation of all the different people you've met along the way. When you went to the City of Ice, there was no story. You just knew you were flying up north. You're gonna head up to where the North Pole is essentially, and you're gonna find the ruins and you're gonna go through it, and that's all that happens. That's all that happens in that place. So you go there, you don't talk to anyone. Now at this point, a lot has happened, right? At this point, Vice had gotten a few of the moon crystals, but then he gets separated from his team because he got attacked by the Voluan Armada, and then he gets shipwrecked, and then you have to fight your way back, and now you've lost a few of your crew members and you don't know where they are and you don't know what's going to happen. And now you're just kind of going through this Lands of Ice, which is a beautiful friggin' dungeon because it was a city that was built like upside down because they built this whole city within the ice. So it was all protected and it feels like you're in these really cool ruins and it's got this cool ice theme to it. And it feels really cool but yet warm because when you're inside ice like that, it actually retains heat really well, right? And the music was really calming. And even like the dungeon itself isn't hard to get around. There's not that much exploration to do. There wasn't really any puzzles there. But after you take out the boss and you enter the next room to try and find the moon crystal, you jump down and who do you find? You find Drachma, who was the guy from the beginning who saved you from the big purple whale. And he's there with that whale who actually saved him from that second shipwreck that happened. And it just felt, for me who didn't play a a lot of RPGs, right? For me, who wanted to find RPGs, but I was still young and I didn't really understand Final Fantasy because Final Fantasy was still a little confusing. I felt that moment of like, oh my god, he's back, because he was one of your best guys. He was one of your best fighters in the party. And you lost him. You didn't have him anymore because he got shipwrecked with the rest of you, but you got separated. And you found him again, and that was the first time I felt the emotion of the story like really hit me. Because I was so happy to see him again, not just because of the story that he had, and he had a whole backstory where he lost his son and all that, but I also just liked him as a player because he is one of the best fighters on your team, and you finally got him back, and it felt so great to have him again and to have him join the team, and I honestly was just blown away. I was just blown away. That was a big moment in the game. So after you've collected all the moon crystals and you've saved all these different people all around the world, you've learned that the world is round, which was like a big prolific moment in the game. It's like, wow, you did it, and then you helped get Fina her ship back and got her to fly up to her civilization, which is like literally a satellite in space. You go up there and you meet the elders that she was telling you that they said, you gotta get these crystals because you gotta save the world, sort of thing. Then it turns out they're also the bad guys. The reason why there was a whole like cleansing of the earth was because of them. They felt that the world was bad and the world was wrong and evil or whatever, so they were just like, oh, we'll just cleanse the world because we know what's right. And then to have a decent plot twist like that, I'm not even gonna say it was a great plot twist, but to have a decent plot twist like that, again, as a kid, I was just like, we were going through this entire game to get these moon crystals, and then these guys are also just a bunch of assholes that they think that they can play God and try and just cleanse the world because they felt like it, and that's wrong. And then another plot twist happens and Ramirez shows up, who, if you play the game, you understand how important he is because he's like also part of the civilization. It's a whole big thing. It's hard to describe an RPG in like a short amount of time. But Ramirez shows up and he just starts attacking the elders, and you're like, oh my god, like, what? And then Galcian's there and he helped them get back up to the Silver Civilization, and now he has the power of all the moon crystals because he attacked you earlier on your home base and he stole them all back, and now he's gonna summon like the lost city of Soltis, and all this crazy stuff happens. And then from that point on, the game becomes this big climactic final battle, final episode sort of saga, right? Like, it was like playing through an anime in that final, those last 10 episodes or something, where everything's connected to this final battle of trying to get to Ramirez, but there's all these steps to get to him. There's all these steps that you need to go through. There's all these challenges that you need to face just to get there. And after you break your way through the barrier, after you take on Galcian, who is the leader of the Valuan Armada, who has pretty much gone rogue just to help out Ramirez and rebuild the Silver Civilization and take over the world in a whole new way, you get down to Soltis, you have to go through this super long dungeon. All this other crazy stuff has happened. Another Valuan Armada member sacrificed herself to defeat Galcian, and then you get to Ramirez. And that fight's fair enough as it is, right? It's a traditional, like, he's the Sephiroth of the game, you're gonna fight him once, and he's hard, he's very difficult, but you manage to beat him, okay. But then they do the back-to-back bosses and you can't save in between them sort of thing. He summons the Silver Gigas, which is like strong enough to control all the other Gigas. He's the strongest Gigas you've ever seen. He summons it by sacrificing himself, and then here's this huge monolith of a beast. It's just a big circle, but it can shoot out all these different kinds of attacks and does a lot of damage, and it's really strong. It's got all these laser-based moves. Oh my god. And then you have to fight this thing, and these fights at the end of the game are like 20 to 30 minutes of just straight battling. I wouldn't even argue that they're like difficult, because at this point in the game you've saved up so much money, you have all these items that you can heal with. You don't even need to use your magic anymore. You don't even need to worry about that. You just have so much health and you've been leveling up and grinding. One nice thing about the game is that you don't have to grind. Throughout this entire thing of the game, you never really had to grind, but at this point you've gained so much money that you can just buy all the items that keep you alive anyway. So you're doing this battle and you're taking on, it's called Zelos, is the name of the Gigas, and as you're fighting him and trying to defeat him and you're doing everything you can, eventually he starts falling apart and he turns into these like new creature and he starts changing shape, and you have to figure out how to deal with all of his new attacks and what his new attacks are capable of. But eventually, after like a half hour of that one, you beat him. And then you get another cutscene, them being like, oh, we finally did it. And then, boom, onto the side of the ship, Ramirez is still alive, and he's now part of Zelos. And they fused into like one creature, and now you're taking on the real final boss. And this one, it seems easier. I think it has less health than Ramirez initially did, so the fight goes by really fast. But the music was sick. The music had this like soaring through the sky sort of, it wasn't like scary, like it was, oh no, you're gonna die sort of music. It was like, this is the final battle. You have to win, and if you don't, everything's lost. Like everything you've worked towards was for nothing. But you have the power. It also hypes you up. Like this was one of the first games where they did the whole, when you're winning, the music changes, and when you're losing, the music gets really scary and ominous. So when you start winning in that fight though, that fight has its own winning music that all the other bosses never had. And it feels amazing. It's not a happy song, it's a triumphant song. It's a victory is right around the corner, you've got this sort of music. And as you're wailing on them, and you're doing these cool friggin' anime explosion attacks that your character comes flying through space and starts throwing all these attacks at him, and there's explosions everywhere. You hit him really hard and his health keeps going down chunks and chunks at a time, but it's still doing a lot of damage. And in fact, one of his attacks is he takes one of your guys and uses their superpower or one of their super moves against the rest of the party. It's insane. And he's doing all these crazy attacks, but eventually you get there and you beat him, and the game finally relaxes and says, there you go, you've saved the world. The continent that Ramirez rose from the ashes sinks back down, and you did it. It was a lot of work, but you finally saved the world. The game will always just have the sort of impression on me that like the game takes like 30 hours to 40 hours to beat on a regular playthrough. I think the world record speedrun of it's like 10 hours, but that's because you skipped like all the cutscenes and you like avoided random encounters at all costs and all that. The game just feels so big, you know? It felt like I could sit there every morning and just wake up, pop the game in, play it for a couple hours here, a couple hours there, and because every civilization that you went to, because every battle that you got into, because of every climactic battle that you would get into, each and every step along the way felt like a new chapter in the game. It doesn't have like any sort of specific chapter 1, chapter 2, whatever. But it always just felt like every time I would put the game in, every time I would sit there and play it for just a few hours a day, it felt like I was playing through a short movie, or I was playing through like an episode of a TV show. I was just being part of the story, and I was just advancing the story a little bit more each and every day. And because there's a lot going on, but it's so simple and so easy to understand that every few minutes that you go through the game, let's say every hour that you progress through the game, enough happens that you can remember that. You can remember flying all over this huge, expansive, free-roaming world, and you remember that encounter you got into partway there. There's even like side bosses, because it's an RPG, there's side missions you can do, there's hidden bosses you can take on. If you decide to do one of those that day, that was fun. Like, you still achieved something, you still got something. And if you just go on with the story, even if you don't get that far, you've at least set yourself up that the next time you turn it on, you're going to be at the next dungeon. This episode, or this play session, you've dealt with a lot of cutscenes, and you dealt with figuring out where to go in the town, right? And what's going on, and what they want you to do in order to give you the crystals. So then you head over to that dungeon, and then you're like, when I come back, I'm going to get to the dungeon. And then the second time you play through the dungeon. You come back and they're like, okay, you can have the crystal, it's over there somewhere. So then you head over to that dungeon. And then once you get to the crystal, maybe there's a plot twist or something. And then if you have to save after that, man, does it just feel like a to be continued moment. It's like, oh no, plot twist. And like, the plot twists were all so simple and so easy for me to understand that if it happened and I had to save because I had to go to school or I had to go somewhere, I was just excited to come back to it. I'll always remember one Christmas, right? You get out of school maybe a couple weeks before, a week and a half, let's say, before Christmas. And you get that week off and you just kind of enjoy. You're just sitting at home, you're not doing anything, you're not old enough to have a job, you just kind of sit there and you twiddle your thumbs and you play video games. And obviously I was excited for new games to come out, and this was after the game came out. This was around the release of the 360, whatever year that was. I'm losing track of time. And I remember I was just excited to get a 360 and I was excited to play all the new games that were on it. So I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And while I'm waiting for Christmas, while I'm waiting for Christmas to come along, I put Skies of Arcadia in my Wii. I just started playing it again. I just started a new save file and I just started playing it. And I remember just having fun. I was sitting there for 6-7 hours a day just playing that game. And I still remembered everywhere where I needed to go. I still remembered everything that happened along the way. And that's all there is to it. I remembered everything that I had to do. I remember everywhere that I had to go, and I was still enjoying it. I enjoyed everything that I had to do to get there. I thought that was awesome. Because then when Christmas came around and I got my 360, I remember playing like a couple of the games, like Assassin's Creed or whatever other launch titles there were. I played a few of them. I'm like, okay, that was fun. Forza Motorsport, that was a fun one. I got bored of them, and then it was like maybe we just had Christmas dinner. I sat back down in my basement and I just thought, I'm gonna play Skies of Arcadia again. I wasn't done. I didn't finish the game yet, so I'll play a little bit more. And I did, and I was enjoying that more than the new games I got that year. And I guess that's just why I love this game so much. It's something that the moment I realized that I could come back to this game, that I could play it again, that I still remembered everything that happened, that I still remembered where I needed to go and what I needed to do, that's a favorite game right there. That's a game that changed my life. It's a game that I can return to again and again. And even though I know everything that's going to happen, even though I know how the game plays out, even though I don't even change my strategy up from playthrough to playthrough, I'm still having more fun than any other RPG I've ever really played. Because games like Pokemon are obviously great, and I can replay Pokemon games and have fun. But I have to do different things every playthrough. I want to use a different starter. I want to try to learn, or want to try out a different Pokemon this time. But with Skies of Arcadia, I can do the same strategy that I've always done. I can use the same characters that I always did. I can level them up the same way as I always did. But that's what was fun about it. That's why I liked it. Because I would just engross myself in the story and see all this crazy stuff that happened and meet all these cool characters along the way. That's a good video game right there. I wouldn't say that it's some revolutionary game. I wouldn't say that it's a game that everyone needs to play, because if you don't like RPGs, you're not going to like the game. If you like Final Fantasy, you'll probably think this game's a little too dumbed down for you. But I wanted an RPG in my life. I had Nintendo consoles. I never had a PlayStation 2, so I couldn't play Final Fantasy. I wanted just a traditional RPG. And that's what Skies of Arcadia was. Skies of Arcadia was that RPG that I wanted. It was a basic game. The leveling up was simple enough. There was a little bit of variety. You could try to learn different spells depending on what color your weapon was, and little things like that. And you still did you could go to shops and you can buy different weapons, but it was very generic. It was kind of like every time you went to a new city, you might as well buy the new weapon anyway. It's going to be better than your current one. but it just felt so much fun. You know, it just felt like, because it's so simple, I just get to enjoy the story. And the battling is still there. There is still like some strategy to it. You still have to plan out your attacks every turn. You still have to try and wail on bosses for 30 minutes to an hour. And although it doesn't seem like much, and a lot of people today would say that's boring, I had fun. I had so much fun playing that game. I had so much fun going back to it. And so when I bought it again, right, when I rebought this copy, because I gave away one of my copies to a friend because I really wanted him to play it. I wanted to get it complete in box. I wanted to make sure, it's not mint, mind you, but I wanted to make sure I had everything. I wanted to make sure I had the instruction manual. I even got a Dreamcast. I even got a Dreamcast just so that I could play, just so I could see what the differences really were. Like, I wanted to learn so much about this game. The only thing I'm really missing is like the Prima guide for the game. A game like Skies of Arcadia just shows you that a video game doesn't need to be the greatest video game ever made for it to be your favorite. But when a game can just make you happy, a game can just make you emotional and feel fun, no matter how many times you play it, that's a favorite video game right there. I never understood how people could pick their favorite video game. Maybe they could pick their favorite series, maybe their favorite character, but picking your favorite video game is a tough thing to do. But Skies of Arcadia, for me, is a game that I could always get back to. A game that I could always play when I'm bored. A game that, if I just want a good week, if I had a week off from work and I just wanted to sit at home and have fun and not do anything, that's the game I play. That is the game that I'll play. That would be that whole week gone playing that game. And I wouldn't even care. And I don't even know like what it is, you know? I can't argue that I'm achieving anything, right? At least with like a competitive game, it's like, oh, I'm raising ladder, I'm getting higher up, I'm getting to a higher rank or something, but that's not what this is. This is just straight fun for me. And that's why Skies of Arcadia is my favorite game. Video was kind of an experiment to see if I could do a documentary style video just talking about video games, and consider it my own little personal passion project for Skies of Arcadia, because I didn't really think, although I may still do a What Makes Games Unique on it eventually, I thought that this would be a fun little way just to talk about it in a new setting. I wanted to try something fresh for Christmas, and I can't thank you all so much for being a part of Beyond Polygons and all the support that you guys have given me. So, in the new year, we're going to be back to a lot of What Makes Games Unique and What's Wrong with Game style videos, but I wanted to do this just to have something a little bit fresh. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to click that like button, and if you'd like to see more videos that wouldn't really be like this and be a little bit more editorial style, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And, as always, thanks for watching.